Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of JuiceBox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The JuiceBox smart charger enables EV drivers to charge their cars with the cleanest and cheapest energy available. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Brew Dr. Kombucha is committed to helping people discover how good kombucha can be. Their refreshing, authentic kombucha is made from 100% organic ingredients, and the company is proud to be a certified B Corporation. Check out Brew Dr. Kombucha, that's brewdrkombucha.com to learn more.
All right, listeners, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Jay and I are here defining sustainability one concept and one bad joke at a time. This is a momentous episode.
Huge episode.
Jay is about to buy a house.
Well, Scott, I'm flattered that that's the lead, but there's another reason why this episode is so huge.
It's episode 50. 50 episodes, Jay. Hospitals and sustainability is what we're talking about today, but episode 50, can you believe it?
I can't. We've come so far, Scott. It's cool to hit this milestone, and we actually have something to show for it for our listeners.
I have gray hair. That's what, do you have any?
Anna tells me I have one on the back of my head. My issue's less with graying and more just kind of like where it's going, you know?
Uh-huh. No, I actually don't have any. Just I feel like the listeners need to know that, but I'm sure it'll come.
You just made me confess this hair thinning issue globally.
Okay. So to celebrate our 50 episodes, we have a party fact guide. What we've done here, with the help of Adrian Breen, is we have that's my mom, by the way.
Right.
We have selected a party fact from each of our 50 episodes, and we've packaged them into one beautiful PDF, thanks to Lisa Pesach. And you can get this for free. We're not even charging, Jay.
Listeners, it is our gift to you for dealing with us for 50 episodes running now.
Yes, and it's a down payment for the next 50. And you can find it linked on our website and in our show notes. Impress your friends, be the hit of the party. But, we always say that we want a party fact that will cause someone to drop their drinks, so don't bill us for the dropped drinks, okay?
That's an important factor there. Excellent. Listeners, one more thing. We want you to be able to hear your voice on the show. So what we're asking you to do is call our Google Voice number, which is 202-670-7357, and leave a message about how you've taken information from our show and acted on it in a meaningful way. So we're looking for the message to be a couple minutes max. Tell us, number one, who you are, number two, what you heard, three, what you did, and four, what the result of your action was. And Scott, I will say, so far the bar is set quite high by Mia Bowyer, who, living in Australia, heard episode 24, which we released featuring Andrew Almack of Plastics for Change, episode focused on plastics. Mia heard this episode up and moved from her home in Australia and joined Andrew's organization in Mumbai, across the world. Hear her amazing story directly from her at the end of episode 33 on sustainable tourism. So again, listeners, call us, tell us your meaningful piece of action. Our Google Voice number is 202-670-7357, and hear your voice on this show.
And Jay, we should say that we're going to make like an episode. We're going to string these together. So there's a good chance if you take the time to call in and tell us your story, it's going to be on the show.
Yes, the odds are quite high.
The odds are forever in your favor on this. So let's go over the outline for this episode. So we're first going to go over the footprint of hospitals. Then we'll talk about why hospitals care about reducing that footprint. Then we'll get into areas of impact and cool initiatives that hospitals are doing. Then we'll talk about the issue of the day, coronavirus, and some of the issues that that's creating for hospitals. Then we'll talk about what you can do to help make your local hospital more sustainable. And last, we'll tell you about our interviewee, Julie Moyle, who is a registered nurse and works with hospitals to make them more sustainable.
All right, so Scott, let's start off by branching into the footprint of our hospitals in the first place. So hospitals make up a significant part of our economy and communities, and their sweeping operations have a large environmental footprint. First, let's talk economy. Healthcare alone represents 18% of the U.S. economy and 10% of the global economy. That is staggering for one industry.
Totally. And next, let's talk community. Hospitals play a big role in their communities, and they spend a lot of the money that they make on social causes important to them. More than half of U.S. healthcare organizations spent between 5 and 10% of total operating expenses on community benefits, including charity care, unreimbursed costs for government programs, and subsidized health services. Also, increasing amounts of money are being spent on things outside the walls of the hospital because they are realizing that can mean better health outcomes for the surrounding population.
That's right. So, for example, consider an issue like air quality. If hospitals are successful in improving air quality for the populations they serve, that will mean less cases of asthma and other respiratory illnesses coming through the hospital. That's why Kaiser Permanente launched a $200 million Thriving Communities Fund to address housing stability and homelessness. Funding went toward procuring new housing as well as repairs to existing housing units to remove toxic substances such as mold and lead paint.
Makes me proud to be a Kaiser Insurance member. And honestly, I hadn't thought about hospitals trying to address homelessness.
That tie into the community, it's a huge deal.
Yeah, and the climate impact of healthcare is also substantial. Healthcare Without Harm published in September 2019 the first ever global estimate of healthcare's carbon footprint. It found healthcare's carbon footprint is 4.4% of global emissions. That's the equivalent of 514 coal-fired power plants. And if the global healthcare sector was a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter on the planet. What's driving this? Well, wild. What's driving this? A big part of this footprint is due to needing around-the-clock heating and cooling.
The United States is the world's highest emitter of healthcare greenhouse gases, accounting for 27% of the global healthcare footprint. China is number 2 at 17%. The U.S. footprint is also not great per capita. It produces 57 times more emissions per person than does India.
The U.S. reigning supreme again in greenhouse gas emissions stats.
Good ways and bad.
Yeah, okay. So going back to that 4.4% of global emissions number, 71% of that is what's called Scope 3. These are beyond an organization's direct operations and relate to the production, transport, and disposal of goods and services. This explains why 1/4 of all healthcare emissions are generated outside of the country where the healthcare product is ultimately consumed.
Listeners, for more on these Scope 3 emissions, we'll refer you back to our episode 25.
50 episodes, you got to have some referrals every once in a while, right, Jay?
They're popping up more and more frequently.
Yeah.
I hope listeners aren't like rolling their eyes like, are they really self-plugging again? But we do so for good reason, right?
Yeah, just want more info.
Anyways, importantly, Scott, it's not just greenhouse gases here in the U.S. U.S. healthcare is also responsible for 9% of the country's air pollution, 12% of acid rain emissions, and 10% of smog-forming emissions. These issues are multifaceted for sure.
Yeah, so the economy, the community, and the environmental/climate impact is substantial. And hospitals care about trying to reduce their footprint. So let's talk about why that is. So first of all, addressing climate change is directly related to the mission of hospitals. And that's, at its core, is to keep people healthy. As natural disasters hit, diseases spread, and the other calamitous effects of climate change take place, people's health is put at risk. As just discussed, hospitals can play a major role in the fight to avoid these effects given their economic, community, and environmental footprint.
There's a strong connection between environmental sustainability and the health of a population. In fact, preventable environmental factors are responsible for an estimated 23% of all deaths globally, according to the World Health Organization, including 26% of deaths among children under the age of 5, which is really crazy, Scott. It's nuts. It's
sad.
Essentially 1 in 4 child deaths under 5 years old are, number one, preventable, and number two, preventable where the source is an environmental issue.
Wow.
So, listeners, hospitals also care about sustainability because it can impact their ability to operate and to get needed supplies. Let's dive more into this ability to operate. So, if there's more severe natural disasters, it could lead to closures at times when we need hospitals the most. Kind of like right now as we address the coronavirus.
Totally. And let me tell listeners about a couple examples. One of the things I like about these intro notes, Jay, is there's a lot of tangible examples here. So one is the catastrophic California wildfires in 2017 led to the Santa Rosa Medical Center closing for weeks since it had to clean and restock, and since 200 employees had just lost their homes. During the closure, people in the area found themselves struggling with smoke-related illnesses and trying to manage their medical needs without having their hospital to turn to. Another example of a hospital shutting down due to natural disasters comes from Hurricane Sandy in 2012. The NYU Langone Medical Center in Manhattan was ready for an up to 12-foot storm surge. The problem started, though, when the surge hit 14 feet, 2 more than it was prepared for. Buildings filled with water, the power grid went down, and the backup generators sputtered and then stopped. Suddenly, doctors and nurses were racing to evacuate more than 200 patients, carrying them down staircases lit by flashlights and ferrying them by ambulance to other area hospitals. Wow. I mean,
yeah.
Can't imagine.
It's pretty hellacious. Chaotic. Right there. Yeah. In addition to building closures, there can be supply disruptions because of natural disasters as well. Consider when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017. It disrupted supply chains across the U.S. because Puerto Rico manufactured IV bags for the rest of the country, and the plants were severely damaged in the storm. For months, nurses had resort to standing at the patient bedside, slowly injecting medications by syringe, instead of letting the medication drip in from an IV bag.
Not fun for anybody.
No, certainly not for those who dislike shots.
Oh, my goodness, yes. All right, Jay, now let's talk about some of the biggest areas of impact and cool initiatives within each one. Start us with the one we're going to get the most detail on, Jay.
Right, so we're starting off with a doozy. This is energy is our first big bucket of where hospitals can make an impact. So the Environmental Protection Agency has ranked inpatient healthcare as the second largest commercial energy user in the United States. Wow. Coming from real estate, that is just like out of control. Energy use in hospitals includes, for reference, lighting, electrical equipment, and air circulation. So let's break these down. The Cleveland Clinic, which is actually working to become carbon neutral by 2027, has demonstrated several ways to reduce energy use.
Okay, so one way the Cleveland Clinic went about this is they switched all their light bulbs from fluorescent lights to lower energy LEDs. This change saved energy, but it also importantly improved light quality, and it saved $2.5 million a year with a short 4-year payback. Plus, you had employees now devoting far less time to changing light bulbs since they burn out less frequently. Jay, I think this might be a win-win-win-win. 4 wins. Our first.
Let it be known.
Yes. And the Cleveland Clinic didn't stop there. It also addressed its 50,000 medical-grade computers, which took up a lot of energy since they were constantly fully on, so that doctors and nurses could access them without delay. They installed software that would automatically put them to sleep, but keep essential services on standby when they weren't being used. This generated energy savings, but it also saved $400,000 each year.
A third change at the Cleveland Clinic to save energy was its largest energy use, which is air circulation. Something you can't see, but has a huge impact.
And I wouldn't have really thought about before this episode.
No, and truthfully, Scott, if you're not like operating a building, who does, you know?
Yeah.
Truly. So for reference, to control infection risk, patient rooms are required to have 6 complete air exchanges per hour, and operating rooms, the most energy-intensive part of the hospital, need 15 to 20 per hour. All that air has to be filtered, humidified or dehumidified, and heated or cooled. An energy audit uncovered many operating rooms at the Cleveland Clinic were doing 30 or more air exchanges per hour, so well more than the 15 or 20 per hour, without any medical benefit, and even when the operating rooms were not being used. It installed a system that adjusts the air exchanges based on whether an operating room is in use. and exchanges only as much air as is necessary. And of course, you guessed it, monetary savings resulted as well. A total of, drum roll please, a cool $2 million per year.
I hope whoever was doing sustainability at the Cleveland Clinic got some kickback here. It's a lot of money.
My goodness. That would buy a pretty large house now, Scott.
Yeah, and overall, yeah, he's got a nice one. So overall, the Cleveland Clinic, which has 15 LEED certified buildings, has reduced its energy use intensity, which means energy per square foot, by 19%, which has led to $50 million in savings. A cool $50 million, Jay.
There you go.
Gunderson Health System in the Midwest is another leader here. It is energy independent at its 100 sites, using energy produced on-site or locally, such as through its dairy biogas project. It has received so much interest from other healthcare institutions that it actually started a separate energy consulting business. I love that.
Looking out for health of patients and businesses, Scott. How noble. Yeah. And quickly, another example here is the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, which was designed to have many windows so that natural light alone is sufficient to light the hospital during the day.
Right. And beyond the use of energy, there's also the energy source. The Healthcare Without Harm report says more than half of healthcare's carbon footprint comes from energy use and recommends a transition to clean, renewable energy and transportation. The University of California system is doing its part, having pledged to become 100% reliant on clean electricity for its campuses and medical centers by 2025.
And of course, there is an added benefit to being more energy efficient beyond the energy savings and reduced emissions. Lower energy usage means the backup generator can power the hospital for a longer time if the power grid goes down in these very unstable times.
Totally. So we just did only one bucket, but it was the one we went in the most detail on. But we're going to cover four more a bit more quickly. So the second bucket of where hospitals can reduce their footprint is food procurement and disposal. So general procurement is certainly a way to drive change. Practice Greenhealth collected and compiled extensive sustainability data from 327 U.S. hospitals. The 2019 data showed millions of dollars spent on sustainable and safer products, including $121 million on furniture and furnishings that avoid target chemicals of concern. But now let's talk specifically about food procurement and disposal. The University of California, San Diego is a leader in this area. It composts or donates excess food, and UCSD medical centers want to reduce food-related emissions 25% by 2030. One way it's doing that is reducing the amount of meat, dairy, and eggs that it buys, and instead offering more vegan and vegetarian options. I think that's nice. I could see some patients being like, I want bacon.
Right. Like, I'm in critical condition
Just
here.
had a serious operation, have a taste for bacon, make it happen.
Skilled is the nurse that can slip in vegan bacon and fool the patient,
Yeah, or they're slipping the nurse like $20, be like, bring me back some bacon.
Another leader in food procurement and disposal is Kaiser Permanente. It set the goal of buying 100% of its food from local or sustainable producers by 2025. In 2017, 28% of Kaiser's food budget went towards sustainable food, with its hospitals collectively hosting more than 50 seasonal markets and farm stands a year.
I love that. You go to visit your relative or whoever at the hospital going through something, and then it's like, and I also happen to get some organic, locally grown apples.
Apples. I was wondering where you're going to go. That's a nice choice.
I just made a spur of the moment choice there.
Who doesn't love seasonal apples?
Oh my God. Yes. I'm a Gold Rush man myself. Okay.
Talk to me about Fuji, then we'll go.
Oh, Fuji.
Yeah.
Okay. Third bucket is construction. So this is important since there are a little over 6,000 hospitals in the United States, and China actually has the most with 69,000 hospitals. So that's thousands of, oftentimes, sprawling buildings that take a lot of material to build, and how they are built can dictate their footprint.
That's right, Scott. So one principle to construct sustainably is that when building, make the hospital resilient. The Partners Healthcare Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston is 30 inches above the 500-year flood mark. Even if it somehow were to flood, it was built in such a way that the damage would be minimal and the rest of the hospital could be occupied and continue to operate.
Love that.
Another principle for sustainable construction is that when renovating, try to consolidate and reduce your footprint. Boston Medical Center spent $400 million to consolidate, renovate, and install energy efficiency improvements. As a result, its sprawling campus shrank by 400,000 square feet. After the renovation, its patient volume went up 20%, and still, even with seeing more patients, because of the consolidation and renovation, its energy and operation savings topped $30 million annually. All kinds of spillover benefits there.
I love it. Another example from the Boston Medical Center is that it installed a rooftop farm on an existing building. This rooftop farm provides 6,000 pounds of fresh local produce to its cafeteria. The green roof reduces heating and cooling costs, and it doubles the expected life of the roofing materials. That's a triple win there, Jay.
Okay, not quite 4, but we'll take it.
Not quite 4, you're right. More on the impact of working with existing buildings is in episode 31.
And listeners, if you haven't put this together already, if you want to get sick in a sustainably operated hospital, do so in Boston. These clearly have hospitals that are leading the edge.
Speaking of apples, Jay, I got a number. How do you like them apples?
Oh, baby. Well played. Well played.
For those listeners that don't know, that's a quote from Good Will Hunting. That is a Scott highly recommended stuck-at-home movie for sure. Gotta see it.
Scott, that needs to be like a stamp that Netflix adds to the pictures of its movies in its library. You know, like the corner has a smiling picture of Scott that says, Scott, home quarantine approved.
Oh, exactly.
Listeners, let's move now to our 4th bucket as far as areas of impact and cool initiatives for hospitals, which is gases. So unused anesthetic gases alone may make up 5% or more of a hospital's carbon footprint. That sounds small, but because commonly used anesthetics like desflurane are 1,500 times more powerful at trapping heat than carbon dioxide, it's actually a big deal. Unfortunately, a significant amount of this gas is not even used by the patient and then has the potential to escape into the atmosphere if not properly managed and mitigated.
Wow, it's kind of like air circulation. This is another one where I was like, I mean, it makes total sense now that we bring it up, but I wouldn't have considered that. Anesthetic gases.
Exactly.
So the impact of the gases can be reduced in a number of ways, including using alternatives to desflurane and investing in new equipment or retrofitting existing ones to better manage and reduce wasted gas. All right, our last bucket is material use and waste. Overall, hospitals generate over 5 million tons of waste each year. So let's first talk plastic. Practice Greenhealth estimates that 25% of the waste that a hospital generates is plastic. A single hysterectomy, which listeners will not be surprised, neither Jay nor I knew what this was, is an operation to remove a woman's uterus. And that can produce 20 pounds of waste, most of which is plastic. Single-use plastic is attractive for hospitals because it's cheap, it's durable, it's easily tossed out, and each new fresh plastic container or covering offers a newly sterile environment. Still, there are some single-use plastic applications that could be replaced. Equipment like surgical basins used to wash equipment during surgery, blood pressure cuffs, and pulse oximeters could be reused and would reduce waste. I have to admit, I thought all blood pressure cuffs were reusable, but apparently there's been a move to single use there. So it's shocking.
Yeah, Scott, what comes to mind is that scene in The Office where Jim and Pam are killing time with Dwight in a pharmacy, and Jim finds out he has high blood pressure from a reusable blood pressure cuff in the pharmacy, right? So Turns out there's actually all this waste associated with them.
Not Jim.
Not Jim, he can't go.
Love Jim.
Another example here is the needle counter box, which is used to facilitate correct count and disposal of needles and blades during surgical procedures. NewGen Surgical has developed a sustainable needle counter box, eliminating 93% of the plastic waste associated with the product used in nearly every operating room procedure. An additional plastic item that could be replaced is the, quote, blue wrap. This is a sheet of polypropylene that covers sterilized tools that is removed and discarded before surgeries. Some hospitals are experimenting with replacing the blue wrap with reusable sterilization containers that can be made clean just like the instruments they contain. Others have a recycling program with it, as the University of Vermont has recycled 50 million tons of blue wrap since 2010.
I wonder if anyone's ever made a joke like in Arrested Development, like, I blew myself with blue wrap.
If they haven't, Scott, it has been done officially here today.
All right, let it be known. So ultimately, there will always be biohazard waste that can't be recycled. But according to the World Health Organization, about 85% of hospital waste is non-infectious, the bulk of which is recyclable. And this tracks with the finding that up to 90% of waste that is placed in biohazard containers is non-hazardous and does not require incineration. That doesn't totally surprise me. I bet a lot of people are like, I'm not sure, I'm going to put it in the biohazard container. But today, only a fraction of that recyclable waste that is coming from hospitals actually enters the recycling stream. Many hospitals, though, do have lofty ambitions. Kaiser Permanente has a goal of recycling or reusing all of its non-hazardous waste by 2025. That is freaking ambitious. We'll see.
Speaking of ambitious, Scott, we've officially gotten through all of our 5 buckets, so listeners, well done. You've made it this far.
Buckets.
So, for more examples on cool initiatives and leading hospitals, we encourage you to check out the hospitals listed in Practice Greenhealth's 2020 Environmental Excellence Award, its highest honor. So, Scott, let's transition a bit and talk the cost of the kind of sustainability initiatives that we've just detailed. All of these cool initiatives may sound expensive, and in fact some are, but considering them in the initial design of the hospital can dramatically reduce their costs.
Totally. So the Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital that we discussed earlier, it was built to withstand significant floods. It took a variety of other actions to be a climate resilient hospital. And it claims that the additional cost for all of that resiliency was just 1.5% of the total cost of the building. Overall, one study found that energy and water reductions and more efficient purchasing and operating rooms, that could save in total U.S. hospitals $5.4 billion over 5 years and $15 billion over 10 years. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, a lot of ways to generate revenue. Looking at one hospital, the University of California in San Francisco found that by eliminating unused items from surgery, the neurosurgical department could save up to $2.9 million per year in supply costs. This is all going to add up.
It's crazy. $3 million in 1 year at one hospital.
In one department.
In one department. It's massive. The potential here is huge. So still, the upfront cost can be an issue for many hospitals. Not-for-profit hospitals particularly have slim margins. In 2018, the median operating margin was just 1.7%. These hospitals can start small and set up, for example, revolving funds, where the money saved from reduced energy savings is then used to fund more initiatives. They could also look to share costs via government grants or incentives from the local utility. Other options include issuing green bonds and having local climate initiatives like tree planting groups do activities at their facilities.
All right, so we've talked about those 5 buckets of groups. We've talked about their cost, but now let's get to the issue of the day, Jay, which is coronavirus.
Yeah.
And we wanted to figure out what's a topic we could cover that would relate to this. And hospitals, of course, is that topic because they're so front and center right now and our heroes that are the frontline workers trying to help people. So, Jay, tell us about, from a sustainability point of view, what's come up.
Right. So, Scott, what's gotten the most amount of attention really around coronavirus is the levels of medical waste that this pandemic is creating. For example, Wuhan, China saw firsthand not only the start of this pandemic, but how dramatically these levels of medical waste can increase. In Wuhan, daily medical waste volumes after the outbreak were 6 times the normal amount. The Chinese government responded by deploying dozens of portable waste treatment facilities. At the virus's height in China, medical waste facilities in 29 cities were either at or near capacity.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that was almost a serious crisis there, just even from the medical waste perspective. Now in the U.S., waste treatment companies say that they are seeing increased volumes from hospitals, but there is reason to think that this medical waste issue won't become a crisis. For one, companies like Stericycle that steam, sterilize infectious trash before sending it to the landfill says that it has extra capacity because elective surgeries and dental visits are, for the most part, not taking place right now. Also, coronavirus generates less waste than other crises like Ebola, in which body fluids were a big contributor. U.S. federal regulators have advised equipment contaminated with body fluids need to be sterilized or disinfected before sending to landfill, but that otherwise the waste from COVID-19 patients can be considered regular trash, if you can believe it. Some still worry, though, if sanitation workers can safely handle the gloves, the masks, etc. from these patients.
There's also financial ramifications as the higher profit elective surgeries are put off and the expensive ICU or intensive care unit beds fill up. Hospitals, especially nonprofit ones, are feeling these effects and may have less capital then to deploy for sustainability initiatives.
And Jay, we also discussed how natural disasters can impact the supply chain. You told that IV story with Puerto Rico. Hospitals will likely look at what they needed most during this crisis and determine if there are more stable, less single-use supply chains they can create, so we don't have shortages like we've seen with the N95 masks.
All right, listeners, we've been talking pretty high level here. We're dealing with a global pandemic going on. Let's bring this down to your level and ask what you can do. So, number one, you can start by asking your local hospital how they manage their waste. Clearly, we've covered that this is a big issue. You can make sure they're aware of the free guide from Healthcare Plastics Recycling Council called Hospicycle on how hospitals can implement a plastics recycling program.
And you can also see if the hospital you frequent has a sustainability program or is part of a collective trying to drive change together, like the Washington Healthcare Climate Alliance in Washington State or the Boston Green Ribbon Commission, whose 20 hospitals have collectively reduced greenhouse gas emissions by a third since 2011. You can also encourage those looking for sustainability jobs or a trade to consider HVAC, electricity, and programming. Hospitals need people with these skills to help identify energy efficiency improvements. As demand accelerates generally, some 115,000 smart building jobs across the United States could go unfilled by 2022 because of the lack of trained workers.
So let's now start the transition over to our expert interview with Julie Moyle. Julie, Scott, is truly the perfect person to interview here since she works both as a nurse in a hospital and works with hospitals across the United States in her role with Practice Greenhealth.
And when some listeners heard her last name, they've been like, oh, I wonder if she is actually a Moyle, which some people might know, do the circumcision at the brisses. Anyway, she is not that. She is actually an operating room nurse and has been that for many years. She's currently a staff nurse at Avista Adventist Hospital Ambulatory Surgery Center, that is a long name, in Boulder, Colorado. She's been with Practice Greenhealth for 5 years and serves as a member engagement manager. She was fun to talk to. You're going to enjoy this interview and learn a whole bunch more. Let's go hear what Julie has to say. Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of JuiceBox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The JuiceBox can charge an EV up to 13 times faster than other home charging stations. JuiceBox's smart charging Wi-Fi features also help drivers charge with the cheapest and cleanest energy available. Schedule car charging when electricity rates are lower, or with JuiceNet Green software, charge with the cleanest energy on the grid. Sync your EV charging to times when solar and wind power are at maximum production, and fossil fuel power sources are at a minimum. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Brew Dr. Kombucha stands apart as a kombucha company steeped in tea heritage and commitment to using business as a force for good. The company takes inspiration from its custom tea blends, making deliciously refreshing, authentic kombucha with a difference you can taste. During these unprecedented times, Brew Doctor has partnered with distilleries to transform the alcohol they remove from their kombucha during the creation process into hand sanitizer. So far, they've donated over 500 gallons of hand sanitizer to nonprofits who need it and expect to donate thousands more. Brew Doctor's mission is to help people discover how good tea and kombucha can be, referring not only to its quality approach, but to the company's commitment to its communities, its people, and the planet. Brew Dr. Kombucha is proud to be the first national kombucha company to become both carbon neutral and a certified B Corporation. Check out Brew Doctor Kombucha. That's brewdrkombucha.com to learn more. All right, listeners, we are now joined by Julie Moyle, the Member Engagement Manager at Practice Greenhealth. Julie, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, my pleasure to be with you.
So let's start off from the beginning, as is usually a great place to start. You went to Vanderbilt for your nursing degree. So what drew you to nursing in the very first place?
Honestly, it was a calling. I was one of those fortunate individuals who knew at a very early age kind of where my future was heading. And I have followed that really without a whole lot of choice in the matter. It's been kind of that driven in my makeup. But my 12th birthday was a milestone in my life because that was the age that I was allowed to go visit people in the hospital. And I remember the challenge of that at that age, and my first walk down the hallway and looking in rooms and seeing, some unsettling things. But I knew then that, I had to be tough, and this was where I was going to spend the rest of my life. And, as it turned out, that has been true.
So a 12-year-old with some pretty serious convictions going on here. I mean, did you also have a strong opinion on what kind of cake you wanted, or was that kind of whatever?
And no, not at the time. I don't think I developed that. But to answer the question, carrot cake is at the top of the list.
Oh my God,
great
I love
answer.
carrot cake.
Great answer.
Okay. All right, we're off to a good start here. So, Julie, tell us, back when you were in school and in your early years as a nurse, did you notice the level of waste? Were you thinking about the operational footprint of the hospital or how it engages in the public health of the community at large, or that all came way later?
That came later. Early in my career, I was so focused on surgical services. I knew that's where I wanted to be. And I really didn't notice the level of waste back then because, in my early years of practice, which was in the mid 80s, we were using a lot of reusable materials and equipment and supplies like sterilization drapes, gowns, furniture covers, surgical towels, you name it, basins. Those were all reusable. And really, my observation started to be a little bit more sharpened when HIV presented itself. Shortly thereafter, regulated medical waste started washing up on the beaches of New England. And so, I tend to think of it as a real knee-jerk kind of reaction that happened at that point, which really started to drive up the waste in healthcare because we went to disposable. There were a lot of things driving that, of course. Infection prevention, I think, was probably the primary driver initially.
Yeah.
There is a lot of money to be made in selling single-use disposable, right? So there was corporate interest in there. And then, of course, just the convenience. And, it really relieved the hospitals of that infection prevention responsibility, almost abdicating it, really. And, it just has grown so monumental now.
No, it's a big selling point for plastic. The impact it has on health is kind of one of their big case studies of the importance of plastic. And there's probably a case to be made in that field for that.
Well, of course. And there will always, be a place for single-use disposable items, as we're, of course, seeing now. However, there has to be a balance, and we have to apply the concept of reuse in the right place at the right time. There's a balance we can definitely strike without compromising patient safety. And that's, getting back to some good common sense approaches with some of the equipment that we use in the operating room. And we have, a good list of options for hospitals to consider.
Julie, it's actually interesting because, I might just be coming from a position of just not being that familiar with the hospital industry, or maybe just for our younger listeners out there as well, where in my mind, it's almost always been the case, where I associate hospitals with a lot of single-use materials. And to hear you say that we've actually kind of backtracked from a sustainability perspective, going from reusable to single-use, not without valid reasons, of course, but it's almost like, wait a second, like, we're moving in the wrong direction. How do we steer this ship around? But Julie, I want to maybe expand the topic for a second, because we know you're very well experienced in hospitals from the consulting side, the strategic side, but that's not your only role currently. So what led you to want to work with hospitals more broadly and take on your additional role currently as the member engagement manager at Practice Greenhealth?
Yeah, because you do that and work in the hospital. And that's part of why we were so excited to talk with you, because you can speak on both fronts.
In terms of my background, yes, again, the OR has always been my first love, and I come back to it time and time and time again, and still practice clinically. I work per diem for Avista Adventist Ambulatory Surgery Center here in Boulder, Colorado. I pick up, a shift a week on Fridays, so I can keep my skills up and kind of walk this walk and have these difficult conversations that in my role with Practice Greenhealth, of course, we have with our hospital members all the time. So that gives me a real kind of ground level perspective, what's happening, opening surgical supplies, taking care of patients, trying to segregate waste, minimize our impact on the environment. That's a real life exercise for me when I'm in the operating room.
Yeah, so you talk about, Julie, your work in the operating room, and we looked at Practice Greenhealth's sustainability data that it collects from 327 U.S. hospitals, and it found that implementing environmental initiatives in operating rooms saved more than $53 million in aggregate in 2018, with a median savings of over $100,000 per facility. So it has this economic argument that you can make to making these changes. But we're wondering, is there one action when you're talking with your operating room peers that you sort of point out, this is the one change that most hospitals aren't doing, but it actually is super impactful in terms of cost savings and environmental impact? Can you walk us through that one kind of practice that you especially point to?
Sure. For every patient in a bed in every hospital in this country every day, we generate an average of about 29 pounds of waste.
Per bed?
Correct.
Oh my goodness.
And Julie, if you do have medical waste, is there like a quote-unquote green way for it to be disposed of? Or, it just, like you're saying, that there's this not so great result of what happens and we got to try to reduce it?
Yeah, the more effective route is trying to go upstream and reduce the amount of regulated medical waste. So in answer to your question about what I recommend, the most effective strategy that we can first deploy is eliminating any unused items up front, right? We want to rethink, do we actually need this supply? And if we don't, get it out of circulation, because if it goes unused, it just goes right into the waste, either municipal or regulated medical waste.
And what's the biggest opportunity you think for that reducing, where you just look at most operating rooms and you're like, oh, here's a low-hanging fruit. This is an easy one.
Yeah, it's not like real pleasant to think about, but fluid medical waste can comprise, between 30 and 40% of the regulated medical waste stream. So during surgery, of course, we have to suction off body fluids and blood, and that gets collected. And that it could be a different mechanisms of collection. But an automated fluid management system will safely collect fluids and discharge them directly into the sanitary sewer with very minimal staff handling.
Wait, they discharge the blood in the stuff, or it has a system that treats it before discharging it?
So with the fluid management systems, yeah, there is a system where in the OR we use a lot of like big kind of mobile cart fluid systems for arthroscopies and different high fluid volume generating procedures. And so it's all collected in a big mobile kind of canister. It's like 20 gallons. And then after the procedure, we'll go and dock it. And there is a disinfectant cleaner, of course, that is part of the discharge and cleaning cycle. So it is treated before it is discharged into the sanitary sewer. But if you think about it, it really is no different. What we're putting in the sanitary sewer in the hospital is really no different than what people in their homes are putting into the sanitary sewers. That's just one practice.
So, Julie, for myself and possibly for listeners that really have no sense of relation really between how big these issues are from a sustainability perspective in hospitals, this is a tough question, but if we had to focus on one first from a hospital sustainability perspective, would you go waste or kind of the operational building energy use side we talked about?
I think I would probably go waste. The conservation measures are going to rise to the top.
And so, Julie, I like that we've talked waste and energy. I'm thinking another thing. You mentioned that some of your friends were talking with you about the waste that they see in the hospital. I imagine another very visible thing for listeners is transportation and the ambulances that we see going down streets. Are there any EV ambulances on the road? And I know that this is something you've been working on in your work with Practice Greenhealth. There's a transportation toolkit for hospitals. So how are hospitals transitioning into having more sustainable transport options? And what's the latest with something that we all see, which is ambulances?
So that's a great question. And as a part of my role at Practice Greenhealth, I did take the lead of a team and develop the transportation resources for our hospital members. And I'll share kind of a story from Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. The city dispatch had logged about 15,000 complaints between 2012 and 2014 of ambulances that were idling in the city. I mean, it's noisy, and of course, it's emitting ground level diesel emission fumes, which are just terrible for human health, particularly because of the particulate matter in diesel.
It's not good with buses either.
Of course. But the problem, with buses, if they're not running 24/7 and are, in the compound, they're turned off. But with ambulances, because of all the medical equipment on the bus, so to speak, they have to leave their engines running. They've got to refrigerate their medications. They've got to run all the patient monitoring equipment. They have to keep their communications up. So in response to this complaint in New York City, Lenox Hills applied for a city grant. They got $500,000 to try to convert one of these diesel ambulances to alternative fuel. Now, they were successful, and they have gotten subsequent grants and have now converted a second ambulance, and I think are working on transitioning the rest of their fleet. It's not strictly EV or electric vehicle technology. It's a combination of alternative fuels, right? So it's compressed natural gas. It is battery technology.
And did it cost $500,000 to retrofit the one vehicle?
It could have.
Wow.
I don't know if they used the total amount toward the conversion of the first.
Yeah.
But they did use that. They worked with, I can't remember the name of the vehicle manufacturer, but they did work to retrofit the ambulance to hold compressed natural gas, batteries. They also put in charging ports, right? So when they're away from their home base, they can plug in, just like, on a jetway. So they don't have to run the engine to keep all of their equipment running. And lastly, they did put solar panels on the top of the ambulance, which charges.
Why not? Just throw them up there.
It's 500K.
It's not a huge degree of the power that's needed, but it is powering their communications. Lenox Hill was really smart and, designed a green logo to go on the side of the ambulance. And, now it's all around the city at community events and daycare centers and fairs and whatnot. So they've gotten great mileage out of it.
And Julie, so, certainly that's probably cost prohibitive on a large scale, but hopefully maybe as kind of the pioneer, is this example of a retrofitted ambulance essentially something that we think we can scale more broadly?
it's very, very challenging. I mean, it's incumbent on the hospitals to have to go find that funding, but it's out there. It is out there. Clean cities, the Department of Energy, have good resources to get folks connected. There, are clean city representatives in every state who can help get hospitals connected with resources to transition their fleet vehicles.
Okay, and so you've walked us through now waste, energy, transportation, given us some great examples. I'm wondering, when you, as part of your role as the member engagement manager, go and talk to the hospitals, go and talk to people that are the doctors and the nurses, how do you approach this? I mean, are there practices that are firmly entrenched that are harder to change? How do you get the movement towards what you're trying to achieve?
Good question. I think the most fundamental, important step in this work is putting sustainability at the center of every decision, right? Patient health, environmental health, and well-being. Really kind of anchoring the work to the hospital mission is how you get alignment with sustainability and hospital priorities. So it's kind of meeting them where they are, understanding what the acute needs and goals are, and working with them from that point forward. Now, there's a lot of work in creating a sustainability program from the beginning, and those fundamentals have to be in place, and you want to come out of the gate early with a win.
And Julie, are there areas of pushback where you're approaching hospitals and actually say, no, we're actually going to stick to the way things have been, and kind of push that off to the side?
Yes.
Yes.
That
was like a loaded yes. I heard the exasperation in that.
Well, it's a little frustrating. And here's why, right? As a clinician, I can kind of get in the face of my colleagues to say, hey, look, man, are you going to honor your oath to not just do no harm, but to care and protect health and well-being? And so abdicating that responsibility is bothersome to me. It's pretty clear now that caring for the environment is caring for people. And if hospitals and health organizations are going to stay true to their oath and their organizational missions, then they have to respond. So I think right now hospitals are going through an exercise of having to expand their scope of care outside the four walls of the hospital. Mm-hmm. And again, to kind of bring it full circle, I think, hospitals can just look at their top 10, 15, 20 admission diagnoses.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? And, be able to identify, environmental contributors to that disease and begin to address those and work outside the organization with their health departments, their regional, authorities to consider climate health indicators in the population, right? Things like asthma, low birth weights, cardiovascular disease, stroke, things that we know are associated with exposure to air pollution. And boy, hasn't that come out recently with COVID-19?
Right.
And the disproportional impact on our vulnerable communities. So if we're going to stay true to, our oath in healthcare, which is the only ethical mission of any economic sector, to do no harm, then we have to respond to these, environmental factors that are contributing to disease and allocate resources to protect our most vulnerable populations.
So, Julie, you touched on a topic that, at the very least, at the time of this recording, is the elephant in the room, which is the coronavirus pandemic, which is still very much a real thing and has been for a number of weeks now. So part of why we wanted to speak with you is because of your just direct experience in these hospitals. We want to know, how have things changed in the nursing practice amid this coronavirus pandemic? How then do you expect our experience with this outbreak to impact sustainability in hospitals now and then moving forward?
Of course, we're still coming away with our observations, the impact of COVID-19, but boy, one that is at the top of the list is single-use disposable ain't all that. Holy smokes, the N95 respirator mask, that's the high filtration one that we have to have on our frontline workers. That's a single-use disposable. And we treated it like a single-use disposable for the first few days of the epidemic, and then all of a sudden we ran out. Mm-hmm. And we can't let that happen again. And what has popped up in its place now is, hospitals are being forced to reuse them. How do they do that on site? Well, speaking of innovation, the CDC has been helpful in looking at research in technologies to help hospitals reuse and re-sterilize the PPE on site. And interestingly enough, these technologies are all quote unquote green technologies. So ultraviolet light is effective on the virus. Vaporized hydrogen peroxide is effective on the virus. Moist heat is effective on the virus. And so, now we are able to begin to reuse these N95 mask respirators more effectively.
Yeah, so it sounds like PPE and things like that we really need. It's not just a quote-unquote green thing. It's how do we make sure that we have a steady supply? I mean, I think it's a similar argument to what we talk about in the circular economy, where, yes, it's nice to divert waste and reuse things and repurpose things and keep things in play as long as possible, but it's also about having a steady feedstock to keep making the things that we need. So I'm with you. I think that there's going to be more of a focus on how do we keep these things around for the frontline workers. But just I'm also wondering how things have changed in your nursing practice. Like, do you have any stories from the front lines that you think are important to share with our listeners?
So I don't have any personal stories. Of course, our organization has been working really hard trying to get information out, good information out, reliable information out to hospitals the first time.
So, Julie, as we now start to wrap up our conversation, let's bring this back to the listener level. So let's say, hopefully a listener doesn't have any plans to become a patient in a hospital anytime soon, but they still want to help promote this important issue. So what do you recommend our listeners do so that their hospitals can take part in this transition to greater sustainability in public health?
Right. So I think the answer to that question is the same as what hospitals should be doing, which is advocacy. And that's speaking up. So, if you are in a hospital, maybe just visiting somebody, and you go get maybe a cup of coffee or some food, and it comes out on, styrofoam plates and cups, hello, that's an opportunity to just gently inquire as to reusable serviceware, given, again, the single use.
I like how diplomatic you were, by the way. Just a gentle prod.
Gentle prod.
That's how they call, giving patients shots these days, right?
Oh, yes, exactly.
Drop a suggestion in the suggestion box. Hospitals always have those comment boxes. Those are two small examples. I think it's advocacy. I think it's speaking up. And it's a little frustrating that hospitals haven't been more proactive in this arena, because that's what we're all about, not just doing no harm, protecting and improving health and well-being for the communities that our hospitals and health systems are serving. I'll just close with, I would encourage your listeners to not get so overwhelmed with some of the big challenges that we have, as much as I would encourage them to just focus on doing one thing in their personal lives. I know many listeners already are. I like to challenge myself every year with just picking up a new sustainability practice.
Oh, what's this year's?
This year, it was trying to get rid of Ziploc plastic bags.
I love that idea of finding one thing to do each year. And one thing that I think is important is to go to parties. We can't do them right now. We can't really have parties right now, unfortunately, unless they're Zoom virtual parties.
There you go.
But maybe let's pretend that we're doing a Zoom virtual party. We all have our fun backgrounds. Mine right now is the Seinfeld diner. That's kind of my go-to.
Nice.
You like that? Yeah. So, Julie, let's pretend we're having the Zoom virtual background. We're trying to make ourselves feel, we'll keep the physical distance, but less socially distant, feeling good. And let's say I want to throw out to everybody on this Zoom get-together some fact around sustainability in hospitals and healthcare. What is that one party fact that I could throw out and cause people to accidentally close their Zoom because they were just so flustered amid such an amazing fact?
You know, I'll share with you the dirtiest secret of actually the operating room. And this is
We'll keep this between us, don't worry.
okay. This is a relatively new kind of discovery in the operating room, and that is the waste anesthesia gases. The body only metabolizes about 5% of that halogenated agent. All this is to say that anesthesia gases are the number one highest greenhouse gas emission of any surgical procedure. More than 50% of the footprint of a surgical procedure is attributed to the anesthesia gas.
Well, Julie, this has been really an incredibly pertinent topic given all of the coronavirus just craziness that's out there right now. And then even on top of that, an incredibly important topic to begin with, simply because hospitals are so important to really all of our societies out there. So we want to thank you for coming on the show. I also want to thank you personally because I have, as a lot of my friends know, an infamously weak stomach. So there's literally no way I could do what you are doing. So thank you for number one, just your service in the OR and with Practice Greenhealth. And then, of course, for joining us here on the show. We've really enjoyed having you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you both so much for the opportunity to share some of this information and experiences as we look toward a healthier future together and working toward a decarbonized economy. That's fundamental in our work together.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you both.
All right, Scott, if this episode were a patient in a hospital, good news, the patient has made a full recovery. It can now leave the hospital, though, so I think it's time to wrap it up.
I'm so glad we had some good news here, Jay.
Definitely needed some. Quick point, wrapped up, not meaning blue wrap, right? We're trying to get rid of that stuff. But generally.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Nah. Okay. All right, so let's thank our traditional suite of folks. We'd like to thank Square Peg, Round Hole, and Potions for the music we use in this episode. And we'd also like to remind you, listener, of our Party Fact Guide on our website and to call in with what you heard on the podcast, the action you took, and the result. Our number is 202-670-7357.
And we're asking you to do that because it's an opportunity to have your voice heard on the show. Frequent listeners that stick with us to this point of the show also know that another way to be on the show, in a sense, is to have your review read by us that you leave on iTunes.
Correct.
Because we want you to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And yet, no one left us a review last month, Jay. So I went into the archives, and I found what is one of my favorite reviews of the show ever. And it's from a woman named Brooke Craven. And it was left on October 29th, 2019. And she titled it Awesome Podcast, 2 exclamation points. And then the text of her explaining why it's an awesome podcast, she just had one word. Jay.
Possibly the shortest, most compelling review I've ever heard.
I mean, I think people are sold. I think Brooke Craven is Craven J.
Oh, man. Oh, Scott, what a beautiful note to end this episode on.
Yeah. And that is it, Jay. So that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We'll see you next time.